As Suzuki replaced their venerable SV650 with an all-new parallel twin 800cc model, we ask, are they making a mistake? Well, before I set out on what's looking like a very miserable ride out today, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. So, sort of mixed news from Suzuki in the last couple of weeks. Although it's not been officially confirmed, it's looking very likely that the SV650 is going to be replaced by a new 700 model. Which is good for Suzuki, but I wonder if it's good for everybody else, because it does mean the end of the V-twin. It's a parallel twin, the new bike. The SV650 first appeared in 1999 with the model that I'm riding now, the S, and the naked model. There was more than a hint of we're ripping off Ducati about the bikes. The standard model was very much like a monster, and of course the S model is very much like a super sport, although rather more refined. Really the selling point of the SV has always been this V-twin motor. It's an absolute peach. It'll go down to as low as 2000 RPM without being overly lumpy, but really from 3000 RPM onwards it's pulling pretty hard. And I think I'll probably go down in the future as very much a classic. It's been in production for a long time because it's been such a great bike, there's been no need to replace it. Unfortunately, the emission regulations, Euro 5 in particular, mean that the old engine is going to struggle a bit. So what Suzuki have done is the same as everybody else. For me, I think this is a mistake. The SV is an engine with a character all of its own. It really broke the mold when it appeared, because Suzuki were not exactly famous for V-twins. You know, they were a company that made across the frame 4s or screaming 2-strokes, and the odd parallel twin, of course. And certainly not V-twins. But it was a great bike right from the start. It's not overly complicated. It's relatively straightforward to work on, and all round is a great machine. And they're a lot of fun to ride. The bikes only make around 70 horsepower, and that's pretty much been the power production since day one. It's moved up and down a little bit. Some bikes they claim 75, but really there isn't a huge difference from the 1999 bike to the bike that's out this year. So why do I think a parallel twin's a mistake for Suzuki? Well, I think for me the big problem is that the whole world and his donkey is making parallel twins. Like hell, even BMW make the things. And while there's nothing wrong with parallel twins, Suzuki are going to be rather late to market because Yamaha and Kawasaki have pretty much got this one covered. Honda are entering too, but of course they're coming in with bigger engines. So is it a good idea just to do the same as everybody else? What I think was part of the success of the SV was the fact that it wasn't like everything else. At the time everybody was making across the frame 4s, you know, usually 600s, usually based on old sports models. Thinking in particular things like the Bandit, the Phaser, the Hornet. All pretty much designed along the same lines. Then along came the SV, which is completely different. It was a ground-up design. It was a V-twin. It was completely different, and it's outlived all the older engine designs, with a few mods for emissions, of course. From a manufacturing point of view, of course, the parallel twin makes a lot more sense. It only needs 2 camshafts, sort of 4 camshafts in a V-twin engine. There's only the 1 barrel instead of the 2 separate castings that you get on a V-twin, and of course there's 2 cylinder heads separately cast as opposed to 1 casting on a parallel twin. So from a strict marketing point of view, or at least from a strict engineering point of view, of course, a twin with a 270-degree crank makes perfect sense. It even sounds like a V-twin after all. But it's not a V-twin. I mean, the difference between a car and a motorcycle is very much that the engine is often on display in a motorcycle and forms part of the architecture. And this is very much the case with the SV. I wonder if it's going to be the case with the new bike. At the end of the day, a parallel twin is quite a dull looking engine. It really lacks the aesthetics of a V-twin, doesn't it? So how long have we had the SV? Well, the SV, of course, first appeared in 1999, as I said, with the original 2 models. It was replaced in 2003 with a slightly more blocky frame. There's a squared off frame with more angular styling and a fuel injected motor. These models ran for a few years until they were replaced by the Gladius. The Gladius was slightly unusually styled in some ways. It actually looks okay, but it was designed apparently specifically for female riders, hence the low seat height and sort of softer graphics and softer overall design. But because Suzuki sort of made a thing about targeting it at lady riders, men riders just sort of went, oh, it's a girl's bike, and didn't buy the thing. Which is a shame, because the Gladius is a really good bike. There's nothing wrong with the Gladius. It's an SV after all. It's the same motor. The chassis was all new and is, if anything, even more Ducati-like, as it's a tubular steel job. Oh god, these guys are slow. So the Gladius was a sales flop, which is why, of course, you see so many of them being used by training schools, because the training schools were able to buy them up at knockdown prices because Suzuki couldn't shift them. So what was the answer? Well, the answer was to go back to where they started and it's a new bike, which was the now, I suppose, 4th iteration of the SV. Now, although it doesn't mention too much, the 4th iteration of the SV is really a restyled Gladius. It carries the same tubular frame, but it's had a minor rethink in terms of its styling to make it more universally popular. And if anything, it's gone back to something like the styling of the original models. Now, these machines have carried on pretty much unchanged for a number of years now. So it certainly was ripe for replacement, or at least an update. I do think Suzuki's missed a few tricks really. I mean, it's noticeable that when they've replaced the R6, Yamaha have gone for the R7, which obviously is nothing like the original R7, but it's just a souped up version of the road-going parallel twin 700s. And it looks pretty cool. It's very sporty, perhaps in today's market a little bit too sporty, if anything, actually. And I did think maybe Suzuki would follow suit and introduce an all-new model for the 650S, but that's not happened. Unfortunately, Suzuki have been plodding along with the same old models without really thinking about tinkering with them too much, other than adding the odd little flourish of styling. So why such the fuss? I mean, for some people an SV650 is just a humble commuter bike. For others it's the perfect motorcycle. For me it is pretty much perfect. The chassis is very good. It only uses cheap suspension, but it's so well set up that for the average rider it works fantastically well. But it's the engine really that is the masterpiece of the bike. It's smooth and delivers really good torque around its rev range. And if you put a loud pipe on it, you can sort of convince your friends you've got a Ducati. Well, sort of. Compared to say a 600 or a 750 SS, the Suzuki couldn't be more different in many ways. They are in truth both 90-degree V-twins, and they both make the power in vaguely similar ways, but the Suzuki is a lot more refined. It's far more linear. It doesn't get very lumpy in the way that the SS's of the day did once you drop below around 3,000 or 4,000 RPM. An SS is great above the 3000 RPM mark, whereas the SV is great pretty much throughout its entire rev range. There is minimal vibration. The only thing that does put some people off, particularly when they're using it for a track bike, is the fact that the machines do generate no small amount of engine braking. This is probably because there isn't a big flywheel like in a Gutsi keeping the thing rolling, and it's running quite high compression with pretty big pistons on what is a fairly light bike. What really makes these such a great bike for me is the torque. I hate mucking around with gearboxes. It's quite fun to ride a little two-stroke or something, or a four-cylinder bike, come off the corner and just pin it and run it through the gears. But I soon get tired of doing that. I much prefer a bike where, I don't have to change gear much. I just go into the corner, roll off the throttle, come out, open the throttle, and the thing surges out of the corner. It's a great feeling. It really feels like you're on a bike that's, in some ways it makes the bike feel more powerful than it really is, because it doesn't quite have the top end surge of a bigger bike. But by gum, it certainly pulls us like an absolute bloody train off corners. Now this particular model is actually fitted with an A2 restrictor kit. It's Tom's bike, and the great thing is the bike responds really well to de-restriction. So normally this bike would be making around the 70 horsepower mark. At the moment it's making 47-ish, something like that. And at the lower end of the rev range, which is actually where I spend a lot of the time, it doesn't make any difference at all. The bottom end surge is still there, the drivability is still there. It's only when you get above 7,000 RPM, where the de-restricted bike would absolutely take off, that you notice the difference. But for general riding, it really hasn't made any great noticeable difference at all. The bike is just as much fun in either form. Although of course, it is nice to have that 70 GGs. And the SV is the kind of bike that makes an awful lot of what is a fairly modest figure of 70 horsepower, because it doesn't weigh too much, it's very nimble, and it's very torquey. So it can convince you that you're on something even bigger than you're actually on, which is a very nice feeling. It's often described as a beginner's bike, and that's because in many ways it's very simple and very easy to ride. But don't be fooled, this is a bike that can be ridden by anybody, and it's not a bike that I don't get bored riding it. I've been riding much bigger bikes for, literally decades, but I don't get bored with the horsepower of the SV at all. I still find that for me it performs adequately. And riding it on a twisty road like this one is still a lot of fun. And I don't really feel like I need any more horsepower than this bike has actually got. Probably even in this restricted form, in all honesty. We've had quite a long relationship with the SV. Our original SV was bought by Deb back in '99 actually, when the bike first came out, and it was a lovely red bike that you can actually see on the intro. And apart from the riding position, we absolutely loved it. We just found it a little bit wristy. It is quite a sporty riding position, particularly by the standards of 1999, where bikes weren't quite as sporty as they are today. It doesn't quite have the, of course, arse in the air, knuckle dragging position that you find on, say, a modern R1 or R6, but it's sporty enough, that's for sure. But it's just about comfortable enough so you can ride it down a twisty road like this for quite some time without really feeling any ill effects. The seat is well padded, the pegs are high but not too high, and the bars are low but again not too low. It can get a bit wrist after a few miles, and a great commuter bike, it certainly wouldn't be. The Naked would make a far better commuter bike. There is nevertheless so much to like about the SV. Now, whether Suzuki made a huge error in replacing the V-twin with a parallel twin, I think only time will tell. But there'll be an awful lot of people who are great fans of this bike who are going to be very sad to see it go. It certainly does deliver a lot of smiles per mile on a tiny budget. And certainly the S version, it's proved a very popular track bike over the years too. So whilst we welcome any new machine from Suzuki, because let's face it, they've not been introducing a lot of new bikes of late. In fact, there have been more bikes disappearing from the range than being added. So it's good to see a new bike coming in and they've actually committed some money to it. I just think it's a great shame that it's not a V-twin. And I, for one, like so many others, will greatly miss the old bike.
Well, I do hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe. And of course, thank you very much for watching.